The rain hammered against the windows of Morrison and Associates legal firm as Kathleen Martinez clutched her worn portfolio bag and tried to make sense of what the silver-haired lawyer had just told her. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her after her parents died, had left her everything. But there was a catch that sounded like something from a Victorian novel. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" Catley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Morrison adjusted his glasses and looked at her with sympathy mixed with professional detachment. "Your grandmother's will states that you will inherit her entire estate. It's valued at approximately $3 million, only if you marry Judge Adrian Blackwell within 60 days of her passing. If you refuse or fail to meet this deadline, the estate will be donated to various charities." Catley's hands trembled. $3 million would change her life completely. She could finally stop working 3 part-time jobs just to afford her tiny studio apartment. She could focus on her art without constantly worrying about rent. But marry a complete stranger? A judge she had never even met. Why him? She managed to ask. Your grandmother and Judge Blackwell's late mother were best friends. Before your grandmother's health declined, she and the judge's mother made a pact. They believed you two would be perfect for each other. Judge Blackwell's mother passed away 5 years ago, but your grandmother held on to this wish. And he agreed to this? He owes your grandmother a tremendous debt. She paid for his entire education when his family had nothing. She believed in him when no one else did. He has agreed to honor her final wish. 2 weeks later, Catley found herself sitting in a coffee shop near the courthouse, waiting to meet the man who would become her husband. She had looked him up online and found dozens of articles praising his legal brilliance and uncompromising ethics. Every photo showed the same thing. A devastatingly handsome man with sharp features, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera with cool intelligence. Not a single smile in any of them. When Adrian Blackwell walked into the coffee shop, Catley felt her breath catch. He was even more imposing in person, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders filling out his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His presence commanded attention without him saying a word. Every head in the coffee shop turned as he scanned the room, his gray eyes finally landing on her. "Miss Martinez?" he said as he approached, his voice deep and controlled. "I'm Adrian Blackwell. Please call me Catley," she said, standing and extending her hand. When his hand enveloped hers, she felt an unexpected jolt of electricity that made her pulse quicken. He released her hand quickly, as if he had felt it too, and sat down across from her with rigid posture. For a long moment, neither spoke. Catley studied his face, noting the tension in his jaw and the careful way he kept space between them, even while sitting. "I want to be clear about the terms," Adrian began, his tone businesslike. "This marriage is to fulfill your grandmother's wishes and my obligation to her. I require nothing from you beyond appearing as my wife in public when necessary. You'll have your own wing of the house. Your inheritance will be yours to do with as you please. After a reasonable time, perhaps a year, we can quietly divorce if you wish." Catley felt something twist in her chest. His coldness was almost palpable, like touching ice. "That sounds very practical," she replied, trying to match his tone. "And what about you? What do you get from this arrangement?" For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. "Peace of mind that I've honored the woman who gave me everything. Your grandmother saved my life in ways that go beyond money. This is the least I can do." The wedding took place at the courthouse 3 weeks later. Catley wore a simple cream dress she had found at a vintage shop, and Adrian wore another impeccable dark suit. There were no guests, only the court clerk, who served as their witness. When the judge officiating asked Adrian if he took Catley to be his wife, it was the briefest hesitation before he said, "I do," in that controlled voice. When it was time to kiss, he brushed his lips against her cheek so quickly, she barely felt it. Adrian's mansion was located in an exclusive and slew neighborhood filled with old money and older trees. The house itself was a stunning example of colonial architecture with white columns and manicured gardens. Inside, everything was elegant and expensive, but cold. It felt more like a museum than a home. "Mrs. Chen will show you to your rooms," Adrian said, gesturing to a kind-faced older woman who appeared from a side hallway. "I have work to attend to." He disappeared into what she assumed was his study before Catley could respond. Mrs. Chun, who introduced herself as the housekeeper, gave Catley an apologetic smile. "Don't mind Mr. Blackwell. He's not used to having anyone else in the house. He's been alone here for almost 10 years. The east wing that would be Catley's was beautiful, with a bedroom suite larger than her entire previous apartment, a walk-in closet that echoed when she stepped inside, and a bathroom with a soaking tub that looked like it had never been used. But despite the luxury, Catley felt desperately lonely as she unpacked her few belongings. They looked pitiful in the vast space. That first week, she barely saw Adrian. He left before dawn and returned after she had gone to bed. They had exactly 3 interactions, all of them brief and formal. "Good morning." "Good evening." "Did you sleep well?" The house was so quiet that Catley found herself talking to herself just to hear a human voice. On the 8th night, unable to sleep, Catley wandered into the gardens behind the house. The moon was full, casting silver light over the rose bushes and stone pathways. That's when she heard it. A tiny, pitiful mewing sound coming from beneath a hedge. She knelt down and found a small gray kitten, no more than a few weeks old, shivering and alone. Without thinking, Catley scooped up the tiny creature and held it close to her chest. The kitten immediately began to purr, a sound that seemed impossibly loud for such a small animal. "What are you doing out here alone?" Catley whispered, examining the kitten. It was a boy, with bright green eyes and oversized ears. "Where's your mama?" The kitten just purred louder and nuzzled against her hand. Catley made a decision. She couldn't leave him out here. She carried him inside, wrapping him in a soft scarf from her room, and found some milk in the massive kitchen. The kitten lapped it up desperately. She was sitting on the kitchen floor, watching the kitten explore the tile when she heard footsteps. Adrian appeared in the doorway, still dressed in his work clothes despite the late hour. He stopped short when he saw her. "What is that?" he asked, his eyes on the kitten. "I found him in the garden. He was alone and cold. I couldn't leave him out there." Catley stood, preparing for an argument. "If you don't want him in the house, I can take him to my rooms and keep him there." Adrian stared at the kitten, who chose that moment to wobble over to his shoes and begin climbing up his pant leg with tiny claws. For the first time since she had met him, Catley saw Adrian's expression soften. He reached down and carefully detached the kitten, holding the small creature in his large hands with surprising gentleness. "He's very small," Adrian said quietly. "Too young to be away from his mother? I'll take him to a vet tomorrow. Make sure he's healthy." Adrian looked at her then, really looked at her, and Catley saw something in his gray eyes that made her heart skip. Loneliness. Deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. "He can stay," Adrian said. "Mrs. Chen can help you set up what he needs." "Thank you," Catley said softly. Adrian handed the kitten back to her, and their fingers brushed. He pulled back as if burned, that wall slamming back into place. "I should get back to work. Good night, Catley. Good night, Adrian." As he walked away, the kitten mewed loudly, and Adrian paused at the doorway. Without turning around, he said, "What will you name him?" Catley looked down at the gray ball of fluff in her hands.
"Pepper."
"His name is Pepper." She could have sworn she saw Adrian's shoulders relax slightly before he disappeared into the hallway. Catley stood in the enormous kitchen holding a tiny kitten and felt the first spark of hope. Maybe this cold, lonely man wasn't as unreachable as he seemed. Maybe they were both just waiting for someone to knock on the walls they had built around themselves. Pepper purred in her arms. And somewhere in the silent mansion, Catley heard a door close softly instead of slam. It was a small thing, but it felt like a beginning. Pepper became an unexpected bridge between 2 isolated hearts. The kitten had no respect for the invisible boundaries that Adrian had established. Wandering freely between the east and west wings of the mansion, Catley would often find tiny paw prints on documents in Adrian's study, or discover Pepper curled up on Adrian's laptop keyboard when she went looking for him. More surprisingly, Adrian seemed to encourage it. He installed a small cat door between their wings. He came home one evening with an elaborate cat tree that must have cost hundreds of dollars. When Catley raised her eyebrows at the extravagance, Adrian simply said, "He needs proper stimulation," before retreating to his study. But the real change began 3 weeks after Pepper's arrival. Catley had been working on a painting in the conservatory, which she had claimed as her studio. The evening light was perfect, golden and warm, and she was lost in the flow of creation when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're very talented," Adrian said, and Catley nearly dropped her brush in surprise. He stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and his jacket gone. Pepper was draped over his shoulder like a fuzzy scarf. "Thank you," Catley managed, wiping paint-splattered hands on her apron. "I didn't hear you come home. I've been watching you work for a few minutes." "I hope that doesn't make me sound like a stalker," he said, and there was a hint of something almost like humor in his voice. "Only a little," Catley teased gently, then held her breath, worried she had overstepped. But Adrian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but was closer than she had ever seen. He moved into the room, studying her paintings with genuine interest. She had been working on a series depicting loneliness in beautiful spaces. Empty ballrooms, abandoned gardens, solitary figures in vast landscapes. "These are remarkable," Adrian said quietly, stopping in front of her favorite piece. It showed a man standing at the window of a grand house, looking out at a world he couldn't quite reach. "They make me feel something I usually try very hard not to feel." "What's that?" Catley asked softly. "Seen," he replied, and the vulnerability in that single word made her chest ache. They stood there in comfortable silence until Pepper decided to launch himself from Adrian's shoulder toward a dangling paintbrush. Adrian caught him with reflexes that surprised Catley, cradling the kitten against his chest. "Would you like to have dinner with me?" Adrian asked suddenly, not meeting her eyes. "Not in separate rooms. Actually, together, Mrs. Chen makes excellent pasta, and it seems wasteful to eat alone when we're both in the same house." "I'd like that very much," Catley said, her heart beating faster. That dinner changed everything. Away from the formality of their initial meetings, Adrian began to reveal himself. He talked about his childhood, about growing up poor with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, about how Catley's grandmother had seen potential in an angry, defensive teenager and given him not just money, but hope. "She told me that intelligence without compassion was just cruelty," Adrian said, twirling pasta on his fork. "That the law should protect the vulnerable, not just serve the powerful. She changed my entire worldview." "She had a gift for seeing people's hearts," Catley replied. "She did the same for me when my parents died. I was so lost, and she gave me art as a way to process grief." "Is that why you paint lonely spaces?" Adrian asked, his gray eyes intense on her face. Maybe I paint what I know." Elise took a breath and decided to be brave. "Adrian, why do you live alone in this huge house? Mrs. Chen mentioned you've been here for 10 years. His expression shuddered slightly, but he didn't retreat entirely. "After I became a judge, I threw myself into work. I told myself I was too busy for relationships. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of not being enough. Of someone seeing past the success to the poor kid who still feels like he doesn't belong in places like this." He gestured to the elegant dining room, "and of wanting something so badly that losing it would destroy me." Catley reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I understand that fear. After my parents died, I was terrified of loving anyone too much, of having them taken away too." Adrian turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. The touch was electric, but this time neither pulled away. They sat there, hands joined across the dinner table, till Pepper jumped onto Adrian's lap and broke the moment. The dinners became a nightly ritual. Then Adrian started coming home earlier. He would find Catley in her studio and sit quietly, reading case files while she painted. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence. The mansion began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. 6 weeks into their marriage, Adrian received an invitation to the annual Federal Justice Foundation Gala. He stood in Catley's studio doorway, holding the embossed card and looking uncomfortable. "I usually decline these events," he said, But this year I'm being honored with an award. I'm expected to attend. That's wonderful, Adrian. You should definitely go, Catley said, focusing on her painting to hide her disappointment that he hadn't invited her. I want you to come with me, Adrian said quickly. As my wife, not as an obligation, but because I want you there. Catley turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his face. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, he replied. I want the world to know that you're mine. The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. Then I'd be honored to go with you. The night of the gala, Catley wore a midnight blue gown that she had found at a consignment boutique. It hugged her curves before flowing to the floor, and she had swept her dark hair up, leaving a few curls to frame her face. When she descended the main staircase, Adrian was waiting in the foyer in a perfectly fitted tuxedo. The look on his face made the hours of preparation worthwhile. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, his gray eyes darkening with something that made her skin flush. You're breathtaking, he said hoarsely, offering his arm at the gala, held in a historic hotel ballroom. Catley watched Adrian transform into his public persona. He was confident, commanding, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with practiced ease. But his hand never left the small of her back, a constant warm presence that anchored her in the sea of strangers. Judge Blackwell, a woman's voice cut through the crowd, sharp and possessive. A striking blonde in a red dress approached, her smile not reaching her cold blue eyes. What a surprise to see you here with a date. Lauren, Adrian said with noticeable coolness. This is my wife, Catley. Catley, this is Lauren Hastings, a colleague from the district attorney's office. Lauren's smile turned brittle. Wife, how delightful. I had no idea you were even seeing anyone, Adrian. This must have been quite sudden. When you know, Adrian replied smoothly, pulling Catley closer against his side. Ow, romantic, Lauren said. But her eyes were calculating as they swept over Catley. You must tell me your secret, dear. Adrian has been immune to female attention for years. Whatever did you do to catch him? I didn't catch him, Catley said, meeting Lauren's gaze steadily. We caught each other. Before Lauren could respond, the master of ceremonies announced that dinner was being served. Adrian guided Catley away, his hand tightening on her waist. I apologize for her, he murmured. Lauren has been persistent in her pursuit for the past 2 years. I've never been interested. He's beautiful, Catley said, trying to keep the insecurity from her voice. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her. Right there in the middle of the crowded ballroom. She's nothing compared to you. Beauty without substance is just decoration. Catley, you have both, and you have something far more important. You have a good heart. The sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with sudden tears. Before she could respond, the music started, and Adrian led her onto the dance floor. Dancing with Adrian was like floating. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her confidently through the steps. As they swayed to the music, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. I need to tell you something, Adrian said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. This marriage stopped being an obligation for me the moment I saw you holding Pepper in the kitchen, so gentle with something small and vulnerable. Catley's heart pounded. It stopped being an obligation for me too. Somewhere between the dinners and the conversations and the comfortable silences, I fell for you, Adrian. He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes intense. You fell for me? Completely? She whispered. The music swelled around them, but Adrian had stopped dancing. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks with infinite tenderness. Catley, I need to tell you something. I've never done this before. Done what? Any of this. The dating, the romance, the intimacy. His voice was raw with honesty. I've spent my entire adult life building walls, keeping everyone at a distance. You're the first person I've ever wanted to let in. The first person I've ever loved. The word hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. You love me? Catley asked, her voice breaking. Desperately, he replied. But I don't know how to show you properly. I don't know the steps to this dance. Catley smiled through tears that were now flowing freely. Then we'll learn together. Adrian, I love you too. Not the judge, not the success story, but you. The man who cradles kittens gently and listens to me talk about art for hours and loosens his tie at dinner because he's finally relaxed. Adrian kissed her then, in front of hundreds of people, a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, applause rippled through the ballroom, but Catley barely heard it. She was lost in Adrian's eyes, in the love she saw reflected there. Take me home, she whispered against his lips. They left before his award was even presented. Hurrying to the car like teenagers escaping a party, the drive back to the mansion was charged with anticipation. Adrian held her hand the entire way, occasionally bringing it to his lips to press kisses against her knuckles. Inside the mansion, they stood in the foyer, suddenly shy despite their declarations. Pepper appeared from somewhere, winding between their legs and purring loudly. Even the cat knows something important is happening, Catley said, trying to lighten the moment. Adrian smiled. A real, full smile that transformed his face. Come with me, he said, taking her hand and leading her toward his wing of the house. His bedroom was as elegant as the rest of the mansion, but it felt warmer somehow, more personal. There were books stacked on the nightstand, a framed photo of his mother on the dresser, and on the chair by the window, one of Catley's paint-splattered scarves that she had been looking for. You took my scarf, she said. Touching the soft fabric, I needed something of yours nearby, Adrian admitted, looking embarrassed. I told myself it was ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. Catley turned to him, reaching up to loosen his bow tie. Adrian, we don't have to rush this. We have all the time in the world. I don't want to wait anymore, he said, his hand settling on her waist. I've waited my entire life for you. I just need you to be patient with me. I want this to be perfect for you, but I don't really know what I'm doing. She smiled up at him, her heart overflowing with love for this powerful man who was being so vulnerable with her. It's already perfect because it's us. Just follow what feels right. What followed was tender and sweet and awkward and beautiful all at once. Adrian touched her with reverence, learning her body with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. When Catley guided his hands, showed him what she liked, he paid attention with endearing concentration. And when they finally came together, it felt like two puzzle pieces clicking into place. Afterward, they lay tangled in his sheets, Catley's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. That was incredible, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. You're incredible. We're incredible together, Catley corrected, pressing a kiss over his heart. Pepper chose that moment to jump onto the bed, curling up at their feet and purring like a motorboat. They both laughed, and Adrian pulled a blanket over them, creating a cocoon of warmth. I never want to sleep alone again, Adrian whispered into the darkness. Then don't, Catley replied simply. I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere, as they drifted off to sleep. Wrapped in each other's arms with a contented kitten at their feet, neither noticed the shadow that passed by the window outside. Someone had been watching, and they were not pleased with what they had seen. Morning came with golden sunlight streaming through. Adrian's windows and Pepper pouncing on their feet beneath the blankets. Catley woke, wrapped in Adrian's arms, his face peaceful in sleep, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. She traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers, and his eyes fluttered open. The smile he gave her was pure happiness, unguarded and real. Good morning, my wife, he murmured. Pulling her closer for a kiss that quickly deepened, they were interrupted by insistent meowing, and the sound of Mrs. Chen calling from downstairs that breakfast was ready. Laughing, they reluctantly untangled themselves and got dressed, stealing kisses between putting on clothes. The happiness of that morning made what happened next even more devastating. They were finishing breakfast when the doorbell rang. Mrs. Chen returned moments later, looking uncomfortable, followed by a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit who radiated disapproval. Uncle Richard, Adrian said, standing abruptly, his entire body tensing. What are you doing here? Richard Blackwell looked around the dining room with cold assessment, before his gaze settled on Catley. So this is the girl. The one who trapped you into marriage. Uncle Richard, you need to leave, Adrian said. His voice taking on the commanding tone Catley had heard him use in recordings of his courtroom proceedings. I'm not going anywhere until I've said my piece, Richard replied. Do you know who I am, young lady? No, Catley said, standing to face him despite her heart pounding with anxiety. I'm Adrian's only living relative, and I've come to save him from making the biggest mistake of his life. Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before holding it out. I had you investigated. Catley Martinez, struggling artist, barely making rent, working multiple jobs. Then suddenly, you're married to one of the wealthiest judges in the state. Quite convenient. It's not like that, Catley said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Isn't it? You inherited $3 million from a woman who conveniently included a marriage clause in her will. A woman who had no biological relation to you but everything to gain by securing her grandson's future. Richard's voice dripped with disdain. Except her grandson doesn't need securing. He needs protecting from gold diggers like you. That's enough, Adrian roared, stepping between Catley and his uncle. You know nothing about our relationship, don't I? Adrian, you've been alone for years. You had no interest in marriage or relationships, and suddenly you're wed to a woman half your age who stood to lose millions if you didn't say yes. Wake up. Catley's grandmother was the woman who saved my life, Adrian said through clenched teeth. She gave me everything when no one else would. And you repaid that debt with scholarship donations and charity work for years? You owed her nothing more? Certainly not a sham marriage to her opportunistic granddaughter. Richard turned back to Catley. How much will it take for you to leave quietly? Name your price. I'll double the inheritance. I don't want your money, Catley said, but tears were streaming down her face now. I love him. Love, Richard scoffed. You've known him for less than 3 months. That's not love. That's infatuation mixed with greed. Get out of my house, Adrian said, his voice deadly quiet. Now, I'm trying to save you from repeating your father's mistakes, Richard said, and those words made Adrian go very still. Yes, I know about your father. How he fell for a woman too quickly, trusted too easily. How he died leaving nothing but debt and broken promises. Your mother spent years cleaning up his messes. My father loved my mother completely. Their marriage was the one good thing in his difficult life, Adrian said. But Catley could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Is that what your mother told you? Did she mention that your father nearly bankrupted the family in his last year, making reckless investments because he was so convinced he needed to provide more for her? Did she tell you that she regretted ever meeting him because love made him stupid? You're lying, Adrian said, but he sounded less certain now. Am I? Ask yourself why your mother never remarried, never even dated after he died. She learned her lesson about love the hard way. Richard moved toward the door, then paused. Think about it, Adrian. This girl shows up with a convenient inheritance, you're married within weeks, and now you're talking about love. History repeating itself. Don't be your father's son. After Richard left, the silence in the dining room was suffocating. Adrian stood with his back to Catley, his shoulders rigid with tension. Pepper jumped onto the table, sensing the distress. But even his purring couldn't break through the atmosphere. Adrian, Catley said softly. Reaching for him, he moved away from her touch, and that small action broke her heart. I need to think, he said, his voice hollow. I need time to process this. Process what? Everything he said was designed to manipulate you, Catley said desperately. Your uncle clearly has his own agenda, does he? Adrian turned to face her, and the doubt in his eyes was like a knife to her chest. 3 months ago, I was content with my solitary life. Now I'm talking about love and forever with a woman I barely know. What if he's right? What if I'm being blinded by loneliness and attraction? You think I'm using you? Catley asked, her voice breaking. After everything we've shared? I don't know what to think anymore, Adrian said, running his hands through his hair. My whole life I've been careful, measured, logical. With you, I threw all of that away. What if that was a mistake? The words hung in the air like poison. Catley felt something inside her shatter. all the happiness of the past weeks crumbling to dust. "I see," she said quietly. "Your uncle visits for 10 minutes and undoes everything we built together. That's how little you trust me. How little you trust what we have, Catley. That's not fair, isn't it? If you truly loved me, if you truly believed in us, his words wouldn't matter. But they do matter, which means some part of you agrees with him." Catley wiped her tears roughly. "Maybe he's right about one thing. Maybe 3 months isn't long enough to really know someone." "What are you saying?" Adrian asked, and now there was fear in his voice. "I'm saying I won't stay where I'm not trusted. I won't be in a marriage where my motives are constantly questioned." Catley headed toward the stairs, Pepper scrambling to follow her. "I'll pack my things and leave today. You can have your solitary life back. Apparently that's what you prefer anyway." "Catley." "Wait," Adrian called, but she was already running up the stairs, tears blinding her in her room. She pulled out her old battered suitcase and began throwing clothes into it with shaking hands. Pepper paced around her feet, meowing anxiously. The kitten had brought them together, and now he was watching them fall apart. There was a knock on the door, and Mrs. Chen entered, her kind face creased with worry. "Mrs. Blackwell, please don't leave like this." "I have to," Catley said, barely able to speak through her tears. "I can't stay where I'm not wanted, where I'm not trusted. Mr. Blackwell loves you. Anyone can see that. Love isn't enough without trust," Catley replied. Zipping up her suitcase, she had called a car service and was waiting in the foyer. With her bag, when Adrian emerged from his study, he looked haggard, as if he had aged years in the past hour. "You're really leaving," he said. "And it wasn't a question. You're really letting me," she countered. They stared at each other across the marble expanse, and Catley memorized every detail of his face. The gray eyes that had looked at her with such love just hours ago, the strong jaw that she had kissed, the hands that had held her so tenderly. "I need you to know," Adrian said, his voice rough, "that these past weeks with you were the best of my life. Even if I question the speed of everything, I don't question that what I felt was real." "Past tense," Catley noted bitterly. "You're already talking about us in past tense. I just need time to think clearly, without emotion clouding my judgment." That's the problem, Adrian. Life isn't a courtroom. Love isn't logical. You can't approach marriage like it's a case to be analyzed. Catley picked up her suitcase as a car horn sounded outside. "Goodbye, Adrian. I hope you find whatever clarity you're looking for." She walked out the door without looking back, because if she had, she would have seen Adrian reach for her, his face crumbling with regret. She would have seen him take a step forward before stopping himself. She would have seen Mrs. Chen put a comforting hand on his shoulder as he watched the woman he loved. Drive away, Catley went to stay with her friend Emma, sleeping on a lumpy couch and crying herself to sleep every night. Emma tried to comfort her, but nothing helped. The pain of losing Adrian was worse than anything she had experienced, even worse than losing her parents because she had chosen to walk away from this. 5 days passed. 5 days of Adrian not calling, not texting, not trying to explain or apologize. Catley had her answer. His silence spoke volumes about his priorities. Logic and caution had won over love. On the 6th day, Catley was at the airport, having bought a one-way ticket to Portland where a friend had offered her a place to stay and a fresh start. She was going through security when she heard someone calling her name Catley. Catley Martinez. She turned to see Adrian running through the terminal, pushing past annoyed travelers, his hair disheveled and his shirt partially untucked. He looked nothing like the composed judge she had first met. He looked desperate and human and perfect. "What are you doing here?" she asked as he reached her, breathing hard. "Stopping you from leaving. Stopping myself from making the biggest mistake of my life." He took her hands in his, not caring that dozens of people were watching. "I was an idiot, coward. I let fear and doubt poison what we had. Adrian, it's been almost a week. You had plenty of time to come to that conclusion." "I know. I spent those days trying to convince myself that my uncle was right, that I was being reckless and foolish. I pulled out every logical argument for why our marriage was a mistake." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles, And every single argument fell apart because none of them accounted for one simple truth. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of you, but you. Catley Martinez, who rescues kittens and paints loneliness and makes my enormous house feel like a home. How did you even know I'd be here? Catley asked, torn between hope and lingering hurt. Mrs. Chen may have mentioned that Emma said you were leaving town. I've been to 3 airports today, he smiled weakly. Apparently I don't think clearly when it comes to you, and I finally realized that's not a weakness. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Your uncle will come back. He'll try again to break us apart, and we'll face him together. I've already had my lawyer draft a restraining order, and I called my mother's old friends, the ones who knew my father. They told me the truth about my parents' marriage. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of love. My father didn't make reckless choices. He made brave ones. He loved my mother enough to take risks, and she loved him the same way. That's what I want with you. Tears were streaming down Catley's face now. I was so hurt, Adrian. When you doubted us, doubted me. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me. He got down on one knee right there in the airport security line, pulling out a ring box. Inside was a stunning vintage ring with emeralds surrounded by diamonds. This was my grandmother's ring, the only valuable thing my mother had left from her family. She gave it to me years ago and told me to give it to someone who made me believe in love. Catley, will you marry me? Not because of your grandmother's will, not out of obligation, but because I love you, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving it to you. We're already married, Catley said through tears and laughter. Then will you stay married to me? Will you give me another chance to be the husband you deserve? Catley looked at this powerful man kneeling before her in a crowded airport, his heart completely exposed, and knew her answer. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay married to you. He stood and kissed her to the applause of everyone around them. Security guards were smiling. Strangers were filming on their phones. And Catley didn't care about any of it. She was in Adrian's arms, where she belonged. I have something for you too, Adrian said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a squirming ball of gray fur. Pepper poked his head out, meowing indignantly at being confined. You brought Pepper to the airport? Catley laughed, taking the kitten and cuddling him close. He missed you. We both did. The house has been unbearably empty without you. Adrian wrapped his arms around both Catley and the cat. Come home with me, please. I never bought a return ticket, Catley admitted. That's fine. I have the jet waiting. You flew here in a private jet? I told you I've been to 3 airports today. I was taking no chances on missing you. He grinned, and it was boyish and happy and free. When you love someone, you don't approach it logically. You dive in completely. They left the airport together, Pepper purring contentedly between them. The drive back to the mansion felt different this time. Everything felt different. This wasn't a marriage of obligation or convenience. This was a real hard one, and all the more precious because they had almost lost it. 6 months later, Catley stood in the conservatory that had become her studio, one hand on her rounded belly and the other holding a paintbrush. She was working on a new series, but these paintings were different from her earlier work. Instead of loneliness, they depicted connection. Instead of isolation, they showed love. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. How are my 2 favorite people doing today? Your daughter is very active, Catley said, leaning back against him. I think she's going to be a dancer. Or a judge who paces while thinking, Adrian suggested. His hand joining hers on her belly, Pepper, now fully grown into a handsome gray cat, wound between their legs and meowed for attention. They both laughed, and Adrian bent to scoop up the cat. You know, Catley said, your uncle was wrong about everything except one thing. What's that? Adrian asked, kissing her temple. History did repeat itself. Just like your parents, we chose love over logic, bravery over caution. And just like them, we're going to be happy. Deliriously happy, Adrian corrected, setting Pepper down and turning Catley to face him. Every single day with you is a gift I never thought I'd receive. You taught me that opening your heart isn't a weakness. It's the bravest thing a person can do. They kissed as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. And somewhere in the mansion, Mrs. Chen smiled and went back to preparing dinner for the family that had finally filled the empty house with love. Thank you for taking that time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.